So I'm going to now invite Mwenda to speak perhaps on his motivations behind the book. And looking back at the past 10 years since the book was published, if the book came out in 2020 today, would it have a different reception in the US and parts of Africa? What's different about 2020? So I'm going to let Mwenda speak.
Thank you, Nadej. First of all, what an honor to be the center. I'm always not sure I need to be at the center of anything, but thank you, colleagues, for coming up with this idea. Nadej, we communicated probably 2 years ago when you were studying your work, and I can only remember trying to encourage you to tell you that this is an important discipline and we can't throw rocks from outside, we throw rocks from the inside. So get into the discipline and do it. So it's an honor for me to be here. And indeed, it's so humbling to have this text being discussed and having had some traction in the last 10 years. I want to say that maybe I could try and recollect what happened when I started thinking about this book. Well, as any person who's been in a different culture knows, there are certain things that happen to you that make you much more self-aware and reflective of who you are and what you're seeing. But what came out of my experience, especially when I went to grad school, was slight disappointments. I remember the very first week of being in grad school. I had two conversations with colleagues from the department, and one was with a faculty member who, as we were interacting in a social event, I don't know what we were doing, maybe playing some volleyball, and I might have done something uh, that he hadn't seen, and he quickly asked me, "Is that what you do in Kenya?" And then the second one was with a fellow graduate student who at the time I think was in her third year. And she said, there's something I wanted to ask you. Have you seen elephants in the wild? And I want to premise this with the fact that when I decided to come into anthropology, I had no background in anthropology. In fact, I was in language education. I was interested in music like Tayo, but I wasn't interested in music sound. I was interested in music as text. So I got into analyzing text. And one of my professors told me the kind of interest you have would best be suited in anthropology. So it gave me one of those introduction to anthropology text, cultural anthropology, and I read it. So I had a sense of how anthropologists approach culture. They are uh, more open to different cultures. They take their time before they make decisions. So when these two colleagues asked me these questions, I was wondering if they hadn't had any chance to take like cultural anthropology introductory courses to know that probably there are so many people in the country that we don't have a uniform way of doing things. So I was a little disturbed by that. But then I found myself getting curious and saying, okay, so is there something we have in text and is there something we have in practice? Do we as social scientists, as anthropologists, ever apply the knowledge that we gather when we study and understand other cultures? How much of it does it actually percolate in our own lives, or how much of it is just book and head knowledge? And I found myself asking those questions. And because I was new, I was interested in understanding the culture that I'm in, I found that I kept writing and asking questions and visiting all kinds of places to gather as much data as possible. There was also a yearning for me, and I think this is why this is so significant, because I was interested in how do we apply the knowledge of anthropology? I was interested in, once you gain the knowledge, how do you use it to solve real problems? Because I was coming from a country where very few of us made it to university. And when you went to university, there was an expectation that you'll make a difference, at least in your community or in your region. And so I wanted to see if I could do the same with anthropology. And so I had that yearning. I was also very active in student government. And through my experiences at the university, I ended up forming very close relations with the Black Students Union. And so the matters then we were discussing were trying to see what are the intersections between Black people in the US and Black people outside of the US. And so for me, it was an opportunity to learn. It was an opportunity to connect. And these were undergraduates. So there was a sense in which I was getting a feel of sort of the grassroots of the university. And it was quite intriguing to see the university through their eyes and also compare with how we were seeing it as many of the African students at the institution. But also there was something that happened, and why this is so important is I met a man named Glenn Jordan. Glenn was a graduate student uh, for a while in anthropology, but he didn't finish. And he had come one summer from the UK where he had moved to and wanted to clean up some books that he had left in the Black House, the Black Students Union House. And I was there. We actually met at the anthropology department. Said, "Hey, come and help me out." And I did. And there were lots of books on anthropology, Black studies, some sociology. And he said, "You can take some of these. I don't think I'll take them back with me." And lots of them were books of or by Sinclair Drake. And I had never heard of him. And I was fascinated because I started to read some of his papers. And I said, maybe this is what I think Tayo was saying. You educate yourself, you do some extra education. And I got to see that. And I was so fascinated by the work that he was doing in Chicago, the way he was talking about anthropology and his own interests in the discipline because they allowed him to do the things he wanted to do in demystifying the idea of race. And I was so drawn to that. And I thought maybe I can try to understand why we don't have as many books assigned in our classes on some of these authors that I found fascinating. And that, of course, sparked an interest in what books get to enter into whatever courses, who becomes the person that you're looking out for in terms of your reading, and what opportunities do students have to explore diversely the menu of anthropological offerings. There were other opportunities, and I think I mentioned this in the book, is going to my first AAA conference. And I found it to be it's like another country. There's so many other things happening there. Very, very, very fascinated by the interactions. Had this probably naive sense that because we are so good at sitting at the feet of our interlocutors, we also are good people wherever we are. But there was something very different when I went to the meetings. I could see who didn't want to be bothered by sort of the minions called graduate students. I could see who is trying to uh, uh, see who they can talk to. Most of the conference was mostly outside the rooms. And then I go into some of the rooms and I'm wondering, the kind of language that is being used in the presentations, I'm wondering what kind of people are they talking about? So it was fascinating for me as someone who hadn't had any anthropological training And then I had a chance to go back to Kenya, where now I'd had this opportunity to sort of look at another culture, but also I became so much self-aware that when I went back, it was like I'm having a new set of eyes to look back at my own cultural practices. I think that's what Faye is talking about, repositioning the gaze. So you can actually start to see yourself from a removed position because you've had an experience elsewhere that allows you to set yourself a little bit aside and see the practices that you had taken for granted. So I saw that, and I decided all these experiences should count for something, because I've had the close encounter, as we would say in anthropology, with this culture or these cultures. I've taken copious notes, I've asked questions, I've read relevant text. Why am I not writing about this? And fascinated me to see the process that I started getting into. The more I started writing, the more it became fascinating. And I would read ethnographies, and I can see that this is making sense when I'm writing about the culture that I've lived in, that I've started to get to know some of the cues, what it means to be in public, what kinds of decisions you take, what kind of interactions there are. So I was seeing myself as an anthropologist, even though I had my field site in coastal Kenya. I felt that my experience in this one space was long enough and legitimate to offer me insights into this place that I was. And that's how I got interested in writing. And I found the idea that anthropology becomes a tool for cultural critique as very, very important. And so I said, why not use it when I am here within a place where I have so much access to information and to people, and make sense of it for myself? And actually, I was trying to say, for my friends, family, colleagues in Kenya, what would I tell them about this place that I've been to? Because we have all kinds of images of what the US is like, and um, my experiences were either enriched by those expectations or probably changed, expanded. And I wanted to create something. And when I started writing, I thought maybe it's not just for people who have never been here, but also maybe this could be a mirror for some of my own colleagues to start looking at themselves. I had something to say, because I have looked at it from this angle. Maybe they haven't seen it this way, and now I can see that that decision was actually quite apt, because I would say a lot of students have resonated with the text. I can see that there's some things that they've experienced, and they're articulated in the text in ways that they can relate to. And maybe also see that even though we are struggling with whatever challenges we have as anthropologists, we want to fix it from the inside ourselves. And rather than try to abandon which is what happened here in much of Africa, is that people abandon the discipline, or they sort of let it uh, be cut apart into different pieces. Like, you can do ethnography, you can do participant observation, but in another discipline. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to be part of who I am. So if this book was to be written or to come out now, what would happen? I think it might be a very different conversation. A lot has happened in the last, I want to say, about 10, 10 years, 8 years, 10 years. You probably address deeper issues of my sense of being a racialized subject. it will probably reflect the contrast that I've seen in the national leadership between President Obama and President Trump, and what that has said about the national psyche and the way people look at each other, look at race, look at society, look at others. You'll probably expose the challenges that we face when international politics become almost nationalistic and almost find little groups of tribes of people, whether in France or in Britain, or, and the tribes are not primitive people, they're tribes of corporate people, national leaders who feel like their sovereignty is being attacked by these people coming from elsewhere. And probably the book will have a sentence somewhere that says, the US has no moral standing to lecture any African nation on upholding democracy and human rights. Because we've seen what has happened in the last few years, where we thought that probably some certain practices are only possible in some young, undeveloped, struggling states in Africa. But we've seen it right there in the metropolis, in the big cities, in rural America, everywhere, where we thought we could learn something about democratic processes, about championing rights of people, about treating everyone as equal, about not pronouncing anyone guilty until they've been proven so. I mean, all the ideals that we had associated with the US, I think, have come to a place where we cannot uphold them anymore. So that book would be having those moments of sort of inward-looking nationalism, how racialized I could feel, but also the idea of the Black body and what makes it such a target for the wrong things, and when does it become an individualized self rather than some entity that can be assumed to have certain characteristics before you even have to know them or engage with them. And I think that's where anthropology would very, very important in terms of engaging with individuals before trying to judge them or place them in certain categories. And so I would say I would still be very much in the discipline. I would be very much encouraging students to study and do anthropology, but to get into those places that we often thought were left for cultural studies or sociology or sociogeography, so that we can tell those stories and move into those spaces and not just tell the stories, but also take some actions. And I think that's what the applied side of anthropology is doing. So that's what I would do, Nandej.